Moroff is an educational resource for the healthcare community, trying to bring back all different aspects of healthcare under one unified source. So we certainly appreciate your coming today for this presentation on what's healthy for America's independent doctors is healthy for America. 4 laws worth fighting for. And we won't go into a lot of other fluff. We just want to get into the meat of today's program. We have Marni Jameson Carey here today as our speaker, and we are so excited that she can be here. Just a little background on her. Marni Jameson is the executive director of the Association of Independent Doctors. It's a national nonprofit designed to support America's independent doctors. She's also trying to stop the trend of healthcare consolidation and thus reduce healthcare costs. She's an award-winning journalist. She's worked as a senior health reporter for the Tribune Media, writing for the Los Angeles Times and the Orlando Sentinel before taking her role as the Association of Independent Doctors in 2014. She's also past president of a medical marketing firm, author of 4 books, a nationally syndicated columnist, and a frequent TV guest and speaker, having been featured in over 50 media outlets, including Forbes, NBC, Fox, Bloomberg, Becker's, Modern Healthcare, and Medical Economics. Marni Jameson Carey serves as the voice of independent doctors who don't have the time, the resources, or the clout to speak out against the formidable forces facing them, including pressures to sell out to hospitals and excessive government regulation. And I'm sure no one could agree about the excessive government regulation. Well, anyway, without any further ado, Jamie, come please and enlighten us.
Thank you, Dorothy. That bio just makes me feel really tired, but I'm glad you're all here today. Last time I was at a Moroff meeting, I had a moment where I was sharing a water glass with Celia Myres, and we both were kind of astounded at that, and I'm glad she came back, and I'm back too, so we have recovered from that little incident. But anyway, there's so much to say, and my goal is not to depress you all, to actually give you cause to fight and root. That's what we try to do every day at the Association of Independent Doctors. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we got started. And I know some of you have heard my spiel before, so apologize if it's a bit of a review, but I like to start at the beginning and take you to what I think are the 4 asks that we should work on with our lawmakers and with the media and with businesses to get this system back on track. So way back when, I did write for the Los Angeles Times for years. I was a health reporter. I moved to Denver from California, and they didn't seem to notice. And one day they realized I wasn't in the newsroom that often, although I was still turning in my health stories. And they figured they could really use me, since I was halfway across the country, at the Orlando Sentinel, where they needed a senior health reporter. And I thought, well, Orlando, Los Angeles, Denver, what's going on in Orlando? How could anything be happening there? Well, was I surprised to find out what I had landed into? So in 2011, I became the health reporter at the Orlando Sentinel. And I was covering all the mayhem that was going on between the hospital systems and buying up Physicians Associates and a few other things, United's contracting, and waking up to all that was going on. And as hospitals were buying up independent medical groups, I was trying to share with consumers, and I honestly didn't know what it all meant. I was trying to learn. And I would ask the hospital what it meant. I would ask the insurance companies what it meant. I would ask the doctors what it meant. And they're all putting kind of a positive spin on it. And I'm like, I don't think it's all that positive. And then I found 2 accountants, Tommy Thomas and Carol Zurcher, who are partners in TZW CPA firm in Winter Park. And Tommy doesn't hold back. If any of you know Tom Thomas, he was a journalist's dream. He returned my calls. He was very quotable. He didn't hide anything, made things clear, and I got educated. Fast forward to April of 2013, and Tommy and Carol invited 100 doctors, I like to say 100 angry men, although there were probably some women in the room, to a meeting in a lobby of a cardiology practice, and kicked off a trade association. They had said somebody needs to do something about this buying up of independent medical groups and decimating our societies, raising the cost of healthcare, demoralizing our doctors, and pulling all these taxes off the tax rolls. Somebody should start a trade association, and then, like the people they are, said maybe that needs to be us. And I came and covered that meeting, not knowing I was writing my job description. Since January, at least 114 local doctors have traded their independence for steady paychecks from the hospitals. The move, part of a nationwide trend, has wide implications not only for doctors but also for patients' pocketbooks. This story made the front page the next day and got shared around, and over the next year, about 200 doctors had become members of AID. Fast forward to summer of 2014, and Tommy and Carol asked me to dinner. I thought they wanted more media, which is why I used to get asked to dinner. And they didn't. They said, this has become more than we can handle while running a full-time CPA firm. We have the resources now to bring in an executive director, and we'd like you to run this thing because you get it. And I looked at the future of journalism, and I looked at Tommy and Carol, and I looked at the fact that I was a single mom with 2 daughters in college, and I thought, this might be such a bad idea. So that's how I got here. And I'm very glad I did, because in the last few years, since I have been working, well, we know about this, independent doctors, we've gone from 57, 20 years ago, to 1 in 3, 57% to 1 in 3 are now independent, and that needle's going the wrong way. We're trying to right that curve. But since AID got started, and since I joined in 2014, we've grown to more than 1,000 doctors have joined AID. We now have members in 33 states and chapters in 6. We have our biggest chapter is right here in Florida, where we got our start. We have several hundred doctors who are members of AID right here. It's important to have the numbers, because when I have a chapter, which I declare after we have 15 doctors in a state, I have more clout with the media and I have more clout with lawmakers. Because the first question the media asks me when I call them up and I say, do you know the independent doctors in your area are really angry about such and so? Well, how many doctors do you have in your organization? If I say 1, kind of takes the wind out of my sails. If I say 25, they're listening, because each one of them has a bunch of patients who are going to listen too. And so they know that news is going to get shared, whether it's a lawmaker or a reporter. It definitely helps to have the numbers. So numbers are important. Here's our map. We're kind of proud of this. We keep popping new colors on the chart all the time. I think we're close to a chapter in New Jersey and a chapter in North Carolina. So we're growing, and we're getting our volume is getting turned up. So what are we doing? Tommy and Carol have a great vision, and it really helps me because there's a lot to be done, but they keep me focused on 5 things, which are enough. But we fight for transparency. We believe that patients should know how much a procedure should cost before they go in and get the procedure. We fight for to stop the consolidation, and you'll see down the road in a minute how we work with the FTC to try to put the brakes on hospitals buying other hospitals and hospitals buying medical groups. And there's a number of ways to do that. Somebody told me, Mike Miller, who's running against Stephanie Murphy, said, Marni, it's like you're trying to move a big planet. Like, yeah, kind of feels that way. Educate consumers about why it's important to see an independent doctor. They don't know. They go to a doctor and they say, do you take Blue Cross? That's what their first question is. The first question needs to be, are you independent or employed? I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but these messages get transmitted around. We're going to start to change those things. I don't think government's going to change it, and I don't think the media is even going to change it. I think consumers are going to change it, and business. I think that's where the power is. So we got to get them informed. We also work to fight the abuse of the tax-exempt status of nonprofit hospitals. We'll talk about that. Okay, that's all. That's all I do every day. We also want to keep the relationship between the patient and the doctor. I know that's really an ancient idea, but we find out. I have a doctor who said, Marni, she's an ENT. She said, before I can see my patient about her sinus infection, I have to ask her 7 questions that the government wants me to ask for data collection. Are there any guns in your house? Have you ever thought about killing yourself? Are you depressed? Have you had your flu shot? And I get 7 minutes to see someone, and half of it's taken up by these ridiculous questions I've got to data gather for the government before I can get paid. So we want the government out of the patient's room, and we want to have, obviously get the hospital administrators out of the patient room. Oh, how many tests did you order? Oh, how many referrals did you send this patient to so we could build up our billings, right? So employed doctors get measured based on how many tests they order, how many referrals they give to other employed doctors, how many procedures they do, how many admits they do, and that's not healthy for us. And here's what I look at. The hospital's getting in the way, the insurance company getting in the way. Oh, you can't have that procedure. Oh, you really need to take a generic. Excuse me, can I make my own decisions about what I need between me and my doctor? We're trying for that. All right, so AID, some of you in this room are members, thank you very much, and your groups are members, thank you very much. we do offer more than a voice on a macro level, which is why I really like doctors to join. Like, you're finally giving voice to problems that we brew and stew about every day and don't have the time or ability or resources to go out and communicate. So, but there's other benefits, and you can see April in the back and my new intern Jennifer Charles in the back if you want to have more information, but there are lots of benefits, savings benefits. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today about 4 moves that if this nation could make, they're huge moves, but they're not unrealistic, we would save hundreds of billions of dollars in healthcare spending and return the power back to independent doctors, and it would be healthier for doctors and healthier for Americans. Sound too good to be true? It's not. Okay, 1, we've got to stop the consolidation. Every day, I think 2017, I know, 2017 was a record year. A consolidation of hospitals and doctors' mergers and insurance companies buying up retail pharmacies, all that healthcare merger was up 13% over 2016. And first quarter of 2018 was off to an even stronger start than 2017. Is bad. So we want to put the brakes on that, and we're trying to get the word out about why is hospital consolidation such a bad idea. Well, we know why they do it. The hospitals want to capture market share, and if they capture doctors and require those doctors, which they do, to refer only into that hospital and only to other employed physicians and only to hospital-owned outpatient surgical centers and hospital-owned imaging centers, they capture all that, and then they get to build it up at a higher rate because they can get more money from payers. I get it. If you're a businessman or woman, that's brilliant. Go for it. I get what they're doing, but we need to put the brakes on it. We need the opposite side of the market needs to come in and correct that. When hospital groups merge, a lot of things happen that are negative. We drive up the costs. We'll talk about that, which most of you know. They will not only be able to get more reimbursement from payers, both Medicare and private insurance, but they layer in a facility fee, we're going to talk about that in a minute, that independent doctors can't lay in and don't, which drives up our costs astronomically, whether you're an employer or whether you're a person who's paying premiums or taxes, which is pretty much all of us, I think. You're going to reduce the competition. There's a great paper that came out in February by Martin Gaynor, who is a former director of the FTC, but he's also a professor of economics at Carnegie Mellon. And he has some great evidence. Well, it's not happy, it's just good information about how much worse care and quality get when hospitals buy up medical groups and doctors become employed. One of the things that happens if 2 big hospitals merge, there's no more competition. If they used to fight over providing the best OB care or the best orthopedic surgery, they would both be sharpening their edge and being better and better. And now when they're merged, they don't have to try so hard. And then they get more money, right? So less work, more money, what's not to love, right? It eliminates jobs. I don't know how many of you in this room, I think quite a few, are dependent on independent doctors staying independent and not going to work for the hospital, because a lot of jobs would be lost if doctors went to work for the hospital. Their staffs are no longer needed because the hospital's going to take care of all that, right? They're going to manage all their billing, they're going to manage all their appointments. And it finally, and not least, this leads to financial harm in the community. These independent medical groups that used to pay taxes in the community no longer pay any taxes. So because they're nonprofits, which I like to call tax-exempt, because the tax-exempt institutions in our society have now purchased them and taken them off the tax rolls. All right, apart from that, I told you I won't depress you, I promise. This is from Martin Gaynor again. When hospitals merge, prices go up commonly 20 to 30%, and it can be over 50%. That's a lot. And then he talks about the patient outcomes are substantially worse. So we do work with the FTC up in Washington. When AID, before I came there, so I can brag, there was a merger that went on the other side of the country in Idaho. St. Luke's Medical Center bought Salzer Medical Group, a multi-specialty group of 45 doctors. And they thought they got away with it in the still of the night, except that down the road, little Alphonsus Medical Center said, wait a minute, we think that's a violation of antitrust law. You just consolidated a market and shut us out. And the FTC got wind of it and said, we think You're right. Well, they went to file suit, and they took it to the Idaho District Court. And the Idaho District Court was probably bought off by the executives at St. Luke, upheld the merger, said, no, it's okay, they can merge. Well, St. Alphonsus, the FTC, still didn't like that, and they took it to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. That's just under the Supreme Court. And they said, we think this is bad. Now, mind you, a hospital had never been asked, never once, to divest itself of a medical group that it had previously purchased. So they thought they were home free. That's when they came to AID. They asked AID if we would write an amicus brief, a friend of the court opinion, to tell the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals judges why this was so bad for the community and for America. So AID took, before me, so this was again Tommy and Carol, had the vision to say, we're a dinky organization. We don't have a lot of resources, but this is what we were made to do. They went to a top Washington attorney and asked him, paid $40,000, it should have been $90,000, but they wrangled the deal for him, or his firm, to write an amicus brief in telling the district court why they needed to overturn the lower court's decision, and we won. And we won. It was the first time in United States history that a hospital had to divest itself, and we set a precedent. So what we don't know is how many hospitals put on the brakes on consolidations they were anticipating because they're going to get sued. So we feel really good about that. So no good deed goes unpunished. I come on the scene, I'm bragging about what my team has done, even though I wasn't any part of it. And there was a big merger that was about to happen in Pennsylvania. Hershey, Pinnacle, and Hershey and Pinnacle were trying to merge. And I wrote a fiery editorial to several papers in Pennsylvania and said, I hope that Third Circuit Court of Appeals has the same clear-eyed view of consolidation that the Ninth Circuit Court, blah, 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 this is horrible. Well, the next morning I get a call from the FTC, the head of the FTC litigation. That'll make you sit up straight. Oh, because I read your editorial. I'm like, oh. He said, I want you to write another amicus brief. I said, hey, I'm not an attorney. I'm a journalist, and we don't have $40,000 to throw at this. So he said, no, it'll be better if you write it. We're tired of hearing from attorneys. It would be refreshing. So, oh boy. So I wrote an amicus brief, and right on the heels of that, North Shore and Advocate over in Illinois were trying to merge. So while I was at it, I wrote 2 amicus briefs that summer, and both of those mergers got shut down. So even though 517 other ones went through, we're still starting somewhere. So then in Vermont, we have a group of doctors up there. This is just kind of the work we do with the FTC. And how we can sometimes call them. We don't always win, but there was a group of doctors, 130 doctors, in a group called Health First, and they were trying mightily to open a surgical center, an outpatient surgical center for their independent doctors to practice at, because it would keep costs down, infection rates down, all that. Makes total sense, except the hospitals didn't want it to happen. In Vermont is 50 out of 50 states in the number of outpatient surgical centers it has in the whole state. It has 1, and it's an eye clinic. They have no outpatient surgical centers because the hospitals have put the lid on all of it. It's a CON state, so they have to petition, and the CON is all in the pockets of the hospital. It's a mess. So these guys were fighting and fighting to get an outpatient surgery center, and finally their executive director, smart gal who went to Wharton School of Business, she calls up AID and says, is there any way you can help with this? This seems like it's anti-competitive. I said, well, rally up some docs to join, so I have some clout with the media, and she did, and we got a little chapter going on, and I did talk to the FTC about this. They didn't get into the case, but they commented to me. They said, well, we don't like CON. We sure want this to happen. This is anti-competitive. This shouldn't happen. So I got their comment, which is what all a reporter needs. And then I wrote a letter when it was open session time to the Certificate of Need Board, and there was a period of public comment, which everyone falls asleep through, and they were just doing their duty, saying, okay, comment away while we vote that these doctors can't have their surgical center, and they don't grant the Certificate of Need, which was what they were gunning to do. And I wrote a letter that said, called them out on all of this, and in 30 minutes, I also sent the news out to the media saying, oh, by the way, my letter's now up. You can see what my comment is. And one of the reporters saw it on the website. Then she went back and did whatever she was doing, went back to get it, it was gone. In 30 minutes, they had taken it down. So I went, that's not right. And by the next day, it was national news. Modern Healthcare, Becker's, all of them were saying, this story went up, and this CON board took it down. These 5 people were like, oh, shoot, we are in deep trouble. And the reporter, then she said, can I have the letter? I'm like, absolutely. So then the letter's out, they have egg on their face, they got their surgical center. So anyway, we get in there, we do our thing, and it's very rewarding when it works out. So there are surgical centers under construction. All right, so one ask, I told you there'd be four. One ask we have of lawmakers is we would respectfully ask them to stop consolidation by removing the incentives that drive the trend. Stop making it so productive and so profitable for hospitals to buy up these medical groups, and so difficult for independent doctors to survive without joining a bigger force. So one of the things I didn't talk about earlier was one of the many issues when a doctor goes to work at the hospital, and I really believe that no doctor goes to medical school to order more tests than he or she needs to order or do more procedures than he or she needs to do. I really believe they go to medical school to help patients and do the right thing when the time is right at the right time. But when doctors go to work for the hospital, their allegiance shifts. I think it's subtle and not even on purpose, but suddenly the allegiance shifts from the patient, what's best for my patient, to what does my employer want me to do? And my employer wants me to create high numbers, meet my quotas, and they're not looking at patient care, they're looking at the spreadsheets. How many tests did you order? How many heads in beds? How many procedures? How many referrals, necessary or not, did you make? And the doctor knows that they're getting valued and evaluated on those numbers, and they err on the side of punching them up. Plus, if the hospital is telling you, you've got to see 25 patients a day, and the doctor really would rather see 10 or 15, they're moving really fast through patients, and they're afraid to miss something. They're afraid if they have to burn through all these patients, the best thing for them to do is refer them to someone else, so somebody else is responsible for not catching something that they don't have the time to catch. It's bad. It's a bad drill. So in America, every single year, 440,000 people die of medical error. Now, you're less likely to be one of those 440,000 if you go to a doctor who doesn't order too many tests and procedures, right? The more you're in harm's way, the more likely you are going to be in harm's way. 440,000 people, just to put it in perspective, is like the city of Miami being blown up and completely devastated every single year. Everybody dead in Miami every year, one year after another. What a people. So better to steer clear of that system that puts profits over patients. Okay, number two, we talked about price transparency. I think this is basic, but there are laws on the books in states that deliberately obscure and make it impossible for insurance companies and hospitals, this is by their design, to make pricing clear. But in what other industry do you have, here's the catalyst for payment reform, we don't know the price of our health care because many states have laws that allow hospitals and other providers to keep costs hidden until they send you the bill. That'd be like getting on a plane and flying to Houston, which I'm planning to do tomorrow, and getting the bill when I get off the plane. How does that work? I don't know what it's going to cost. Oh, and by the way, you had an extra Diet Coke. That'll be $45. What? So these are things that shouldn't happen. That the patient should know. The plumber can tell you before he removes your garbage disposal what it's going to cost, right? Why can't we do this in healthcare? Because the hospitals don't want that to happen. Otherwise, game over. So there is a bill on the books right now in Congress. It's a bipartisan bill, and aid is bipartisan. We just want the right thing to happen. We don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, just get on the right side of this thing. It's Bill 4808. I do want you to write that down, and I do want you to note this bill. The two congressmen behind it are one representative, Ed Perlmutter from Colorado, he's a Democrat, and one Republican from Wisconsin, Mike Gallagher. I met with Mike Gallagher. I've talked with Ed Perlmutter's office. I told him that we are all over this thing. We totally want this bill to pass. When I talked to his healthcare advisor, I said, how's this bill going? He says, well, we're socializing the idea. Like, this isn't a puppy. This is an idea. What do you mean socializing? This is a great idea. What do you have to socialize? Well, it's not all that simple. It's not that simple because the Hospital Association and other special interests are pouring lots of money, and we'll get to that, in representatives' pockets to make sure this doesn't go. But if enough Americans understand, all this is just tell me the price before. Every medical provider needs to tell me up front what the price is before the procedure happens. Hello? So I think this should be law. And I think you all should know about it and tell Stephanie Murphy, who I'm meeting with on August 24th, and all your legislators, congresspeople, to look at this law and make sure they pay attention. Okay, so our respectful ask, and again, I think transparency, why would that bring costs down? Because if I know I can get a knee replacement over here for $7,500, and in the hospital it's $45,000, and the outcome's better here and there's lower infection rate, but I don't know that when I'm making my decisions. If I had that information, I would shop for value and price. Okay, facility fees. They're layered in fees that add absolutely zero value to the care that you receive. And they automatically get patted on when a hospital goes to work for the hospital. Now, I have been up to Medicare, the CMS offices, and I have sat down with top deputy officers, and I've read their reports. Medicare wants, CMS will say in its reports in the Medicare Payment Advisory Commission, which is a commission that Congress set up so Congress could learn how to save money. Is that basic? Congress sets up a commission, Medicare Payment Advisory Commission, to tell Congress how to save money. Since 2012, they have been saying site neutrality. Site neutrality is a fancy way of saying if the same procedure should be charged for the same amount regardless of where it's performed. Except when it's performed in a hospital, it's 4 times more. Well, that's caused a facility fees. Hospitals say, oh, well, we treat the sick and poor, and we have these giant buildings, and we need to cover our overhead, so we need to charge more. Well, really provide charitable care, A. B, don't build $300 million towers that nobody goes into, and don't have valet parking and marble fountains, and maybe you can cut some of your costs. Just an idea. So anyway, we would like site neutrality, so I'm going up to them, I'm like, help me out. You all, Medicare Payment Advisory Commission is saying site neutrality. Why isn't it? Why haven't you done it? He goes, we can't. It's Congress. It's in the law. It's written in the law how hospitals gets paid. It's the hospital outpatient, HOPD. You all know better than I do. An independent doctor line of billing. It's just segregated. And we can't bridge that. It's going to take an act of Congress. It's not Medicare's fault. So Congress isn't following the advice of its own commission year over year. See, I thought the Medicare Payment Advisory Commission was advising Medicare. It's not. It's advising Congress, who doesn't want to hear it, because they're getting $22 million a year in lobbying money from the American Hospital Association. Okay, so here's an example. I didn't cherry pick. This is from the Medicare Payment Advisory Commission. Just as an example, heart cath, $1,100, and a hospital outpatient, they'll charge you 4 times more. MRI, this is pretty low, actually. I've seen them up to $3,500 for something that's $400. They can be almost 10 times more. EKG. Now imagine if the hospital charged what they pay the freestanding center. Imagine if all the time they did this, it was charged at this price, how much money we'd save. There are some estimates. Oh, here's one more. Primary care center, just 220% more cost is 220% greater when you see an employed doctor, primary care doctor, versus an independent doctor. The average, under the codes, Medicare will pay or this is actually Blue Cross. This is a provider, insurer. $117 versus $261. That's what Blue Cross contracted rates on average. If it's a specialist, I took an ophthalmologist, giving an eye exam, $84 if you go to an independent ophthalmologist, $278 to go to one who's employed by the hospital because of the facility fee and because they can bargain these greater reimbursements. Is the care any better? No. In fact, you're probably going to get worse care because they're going to refer you all over the place for tests you don't need. All right, 275% more. If we could right the ship, move it back to the independent market, look at the savings. So over the weekend, you say Dorothy's out and she's having a good time and she hurts her knee. Bummer. She goes to an independent doctor who sends her to an independent orthopedist who sends her to an independent MRI and says, you know what, you're going to have a little arthroscopic surgery. So she sucks it up and goes to an independent outpatient freestanding surgical center. Total bill, maybe $7,000, $7,500 or so. I had that done, so you know it kind of cost that. Go over this side. She inadvertently, unwittingly, not knowing, goes to an employed doctor who sends her to an employed orthopedist who sends her to a hospital-owned MRI. And then she has surgery in a hospital-owned outpatient center, and every cost is at least tripled, probably quadrupled. So she's paying $30,000. It compounds. It compounds. It's not just one visit here, one test there. It's a compounding, and then multiply that by all the people going to the wrong. And as there are fewer independent doctors, there's more people doing this side of things. That's driving our costs this way. So where is all the money going? Where is all the money going? I didn't make this up. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Since 1970, well, almost 50 years ago, this little line down here is the growth of physicians in our country. This is the growth of hospital administrators. 3,000% more. That's where the money's going. These are people who never touch a patient, never sign a chart, and can't lose their license for making the wrong decision. If they work for a nonprofit, they don't even lose stock. They still get paid a lot. That needs to be leveled out. The money's going here because of all this overcharging that I've just shown you. This was from JAMA a few years ago, a study that came out that it was just a basic study like, oh yeah, this doesn't surprise anybody. If you're a patient of an independent doctor and that doctor admits you to the hospital, the mean cost per inpatient is $3,000. The mean cost for a hospital-owned doctor is 41% more, $4,300. And the mean cost for a multi-hospital-owned doctor, like one owned by Florida Hospitals Adventist System or Orlando Regional Medical Centers Complex, right? It's going to be 56% more on average. Again, multiply that out, 56% more. Just the average hospitalization cost for a day. That, again, this is where the waste is. There's no more value here. This is waste. Okay, so if for just 66 groups of services, according to Medicare, and again, the Medicare Payment Advisory Commission, for 66 groups, if you were to level out the chart, get rid of the facility fees and have more site neutrality, we would save $900 million, let's call it $1 billion a year, just on 66 services, just on Medicare. Not this, then as Medicare goes, private insurance follows, so we would then have all the private insurers coming along and leveling the playing field and paying the same amount to the doctors, whether they're employed or not. See, when the hospitals are getting paid so much more and getting so much more profitable for the same procedure, a bunch of things happen that go awry. They have the money to lure doctors out of independent medicine because they can wag the carrot and say, we can pay you so much more. But on the other hand, the independent doctors have to get a haircut. They get less and less as the hospitals get more and more. So it's this flywheel. And the more they buy, the doctors, the bigger they get, the more money they make, and the more they can afford to pay, and the more it drives the independent doctor out of business. So if we leveled the playing field and independent doctors got the same amount as employed physicians, that flywheel would stop. Independent doctors could survive out of this network. And the hospitals would lose their appetites for buying up independent doctors. Now you will see these cranked up studies that show that hospitals actually lose money, poor things, on the independent doctors when they buy these private medical groups. Oh, we're losing money, we're doing it for the good of the community and to streamline care. They're getting it all back and all the tests and all the ancillaries and all that stuff when they can layer in the facility fees. So don't be deluded by that. Anyway, we could save some money. Okay, so here I am in Maine with Governor LePage, who's a character, and a couple aide members, 2 doctors. They both have properties in Maine and they work in Maine. And we were talking to him about facility fees. So what he did, next time he created a budget, he said, now Maine is dinky, right? Dinky state of Maine. And I think it has like, what, 1.5 million people, 1.2 million people? Not very many. But if all he can control, Governor LePage, is Medicaid, because that's a state budget item. So he said, okay, we're not putting any more Medicaid dollars toward facility fees. Game over, end of story. Just by doing that, this was a recommendation he made in his budget. It didn't all get passed. But just by doing that, the state of Maine, dinky state of Maine, with 5 people living in it, would save $11.4 million. Just by taking facility fees out of Medicaid, not Medicare, not private insurance, in a little state. Multiply that over the rest of the country. Just removing, don't let any government dollars pay facility fees. What a concept. All right, so we would respectfully ask, this is my third ask, lawmakers to abolish facility fees and require site neutrality, and so to eliminate the incentives for hospitals to create monopolies, and it would save Americans several $billions a year. Real deal, if we could do this, if. But I think if I have enough of these conversations with enough people around the country, you'll get fired up. And you'll go, you know what, this is wrong, I think. How many would you say this is a good idea? You with me? Okay, anybody against me? Oh, okay, are you sure? There's probably someone in the room. I'm just checking here. All right, if I have all my tires are slashed when I walk out, I'll know. All right, my fourth ask. This one, I'm glad you're all sitting down. We need to stop the abuse of the tax-exempt status by nonprofit hospitals. 62% of the hospitals in this country are tax-exempt. 62%, about 3,500, 3,900 hospitals pay no property tax, no sales tax, no tangible tax, no real estate tax, no state or federal income tax, no tax at all. And why? Because back in the 60s, before the mid-60s, there were truly sick and indigent and poor people who could not get health care. So the nuns stepped up and said, we'll help you. And the government said, and if you help the sick and the poor, you lovely nuns, we won't charge you any taxes. Well, that was pretty gracious. You know, it was a good idea at the time. Well, then the nuns are gone, and now we have hospital administrators, we saw how many, taking advantage of that and blowing it out of proportion. And nobody's putting the brakes on it. So whenever a hospital buys an independent medical group, all the money that group was paying into the community in the way of taxes, whether payroll taxes, income taxes, property taxes, gets swept up. And we all suffer financial harm. So just two groups got purchased. This was way back in the 2013, 2014, as I was just getting on board. I just remember these numbers. It was about a 17-doctor cardiology group and a 14 or 15 doctor urology group. These two entities got purchased by our large medical centers here in town, and $350,000 of property tax only came off the tax rolls. $350,000 a year. That those property taxes for the buildings that those doctors worked in now got acquired, the real estate got acquired by the hospital, and those, not this income, none of this, all the other stuff went away too, but we know we can look at the property tax records. $350,000 pays a couple of teachers, or a few of them, or in Little League fields and libraries and police on the street. Okay, so I knew this was going on, and I had a connection at the Orlando Sentinel, so I told Beth Kassab, I mean, I would try to write stuff at the Sentinel as the health reporter, and a lot of my stories did not come out. Not a lot, a few, because I kind of gave up. But if it were too unfavorable to the hospital, the publishers got a little worried about advertising. I understand. Newspapers are struggling, and they do the best they can, and I know what they're up against. I'm not faulting them. But Beth Kassab was a columnist, and she could have an edge. She could have a point of view. So we spoon-fed her all of the information about the property taxes from Orlando Health and from Florida Hospital. This is where to look. Tommy just took her and said, look, look, look. And she's a smart woman. She's like, So she went in, and she spent a lot of time in the assessor's office in 5 counties. I think it was just 5 counties, yeah, in Central Florida, and found out that Orlando Health and Adventist paid property taxes on their properties in those 5 counties. The community would get $50 million a year. 5 counties, Central Florida, $50 million a year. They're taking it from us. And they're paying their top C-level executives 7-figure salaries. And they're taking huge vacations. And Florida Hospital has $4 billion in unsecured assets. They should be, if they're truly a nonprofit, they should be giving a year of free care to the entire community. All right. I told you, I was glad you were sitting down. So here's one of the ways they get away with it. They now have to disclose their charitable care on their 990. Well, that's awesome, except that they get to pick how much their charitable care costs. This is from the Florida Bar Journal publication. This, we've heard about ChargeMaster. the retail price that nobody pays that the hospital says it would really cost if we didn't have to crunch it down and Medicare wasn't so stingy, that number. So Medicare allowable for, let's just pick something, chest pain. Okay, I go to the hospital for chest pain. Medicare allowable says I'll pay the hospital $3,600 for that. Their charge master price, $25,000. These are not, I'm not making it's 10 or 10, 8, 9, 10 times more. What they say they have given away in free care, and Medicare allowable is pretty good. Medicare allowable, they have pretty good people. One thing the government does pretty well is looks and says, that's how much that procedure should cost, without cutting corners, but making it efficient. And because nobody's questioning them, look at this, a laparoscopic cholecystectomy, okay, 10 grand, we'll pay you. They're going to say, if I'm a poor person who comes in with no insurance and I need one of these things, they're writing it off as this much. They're saying this is how much we're giving in charitable care. So that's one of the ways they get around it. Okay, so let me calm down a little bit here. But, so what we're asking at lawmakers, and there is, who's the guy in Iowa, Grassley, Senator Grassley, has truly taken this on up on the Hill. He has put in laws that say this has to stop. And he is getting roundly shut down. I routinely call and send materials to Grassley's office saying, if you ever resurrect this again, we're all over it. But it's an uphill battle to remove the tax-exempt status. So would at least here's what we'd like to do. And they did make a step. There was charging, now there's a law that came out that the hospitals are trying to wrangle around, which is any executive, which is most of them, I just saw the number the other day, it's a lot, of CEOs who make over $1 million at nonprofit hospitals, the hospital needs to pay a 21% excess tax on that salary. That's smarts. That's smarts. So some of these people, some are making $17 million a year, and the hospital now has to write a 21% excise, and that's in all their total compensation, right? So there's things that we're trying to do to make it a little less desirable to, I mean, if you're a nonprofit, one rule that I've heard that makes total sense to me is if you're running a nonprofit, the head of a nonprofit shouldn't make 10 times more than the average person in your community. So let's say the average person who's working full-time in your community makes $50,000, $60,000, give them $60,000. Then the CEO of the nonprofit in that community shouldn't make more than $600,000. That just seems fair. Or pay taxes, or run like a real business. I don't care if you're paying taxes and you make a gazillion dollars, go for it. But if you're going to be a nonprofit, behave like a nonprofit. So we would ask lawmakers to shut down this abuse, to get nonprofit hospitals to provide true costs for their charitable care, not inflated costs, to pay their executives something in line, and to pay taxes if they don't want to do either one of those things. For-profit hospitals give back all the time. I know a lot of independent doctors that give free care. If they get called in the middle of the night in the emergency room and they have to see someone who has no insurance, they don't get paid. That's just called being a human being. All right, so winding it up, again, I want to recap. If we stop the consolidation and stopped hospitals from owning everything, and we need hospitals, we need really good hospitals, and we have really good hospitals, we just don't need them owning everything. So if we were to stop the consolidation, do you see how that would help independent doctors across America? If independent doctors could operate freely, unfettered, and non-intrusive medicine without an administrator saying, how many tests have you ordered today? Have you met your quota on your patient volume? If we stop the consolidation and stop the facility fees from getting layered in, you see how that would be healthy for independent doctors and healthy for America? If we encourage transparency, if consumers really could go to a doctor and know before they have a procedure how much it's going to cost, you're going to steer the market toward the independent doctor who's a bargain and with good value compared to the employed track. You see how that would be healthy for independent doctors and healthy for America? If we eliminated facility fees, same drill. Again, it would right the ship. It would cause the hospitals to not be so interested in buying up groups where they could layer on these facility fees and make a lot more money. If we eliminated that, we'd get more independent doctors out there who weren't doing procedures and ordering tests and referring patients for the wrong reasons, and who could spend more time with them because it's up to them how many patients they see a day, not up to some administrator with a 4-year degree. And the doctor who's been to school for 12 years has to take orders from somebody who went to MBA school. That's better for independent doctors, right? And how about this? We stopped the abuse of the tax-exempt status, and hospitals did not have all the money and the reserves to pull doctors off of the tax rolls and be able to pay them more money and higher salaries. And the doctors, at some point, I don't think they do it for the money. They do it to get rid of out from under all the overhead and all for the government intrusions that cause them to just fold the tent and go to work for the hospital. I don't think any doctor really wants to work for the hospital. But one of the reasons the hospitals can pay them so handsomely is because they don't pay taxes. So that would be healthy for all of us. 4 moves: hundreds of billions of dollars, improve access, and restore the relationship between the doctor and the patient. Who's with me? Good. All right, well, let's go. Let's do that. So again, I'm trying to summon it up. Save America's doctors. We need them. We want what's healthy for America's independent doctors is healthy for America. Just showed you that. And we're working with media, we're working with businesses, we're working with lawmakers, and working with doctors to help turn this ship around. It's a David and Goliath situation for sure, but we need your help. If you can join us, join us. We'd love you to. Okay. Any questions?
Ken Peach from the Health
Hi,
Council
Ken.
of East Central Florida. I'm everything that you're concerned about. I'm an MBA, I'm a former hospital administrator. I did the first joint venture between a for-profit, not-for-profit hospital in the US here in Longwood. But one of the reasons I did that is because we were in trouble. We were a small hospital, independent in the community, and in order to survive, we had to look at a way that we could join someone else, and that joining took place with Orlando Health. If you look now outside of the state of Florida, in large part, some of the hospitals that are out there, you mentioned on your slide, Vermont Critical Access Hospitals, small hospitals, sole hospitals in communities around the country that are in financial difficulty. So while the statistics indicate that in healthcare, the problem with the US versus other countries is not volume, it is cost, to your point, you're right on target. But what do you do about those small communities where the only place for physicians, independent physicians, to practice is those very small hospitals that are being threatened if they don't consolidate?
It's a great question, Ken. And the question is, there are a lot of not very many left, many independent hospitals, not in doctors so much, hospitals around the country have been forced to join up with larger health systems to be able to manage risk and manage their costs and stay in business because they are struggling. There is a very uncomfortable, and that's a great point, and I want our hospitals to survive, and I know they're struggling, and I know they're well-intentioned. I don't mind hospitals getting together and having a little more strength to a degree, as long as they don't create monopolies, and they can take up these little stragglers and create stronger entities, but I don't think we need 2 giant duopolies like we have here. I think that's unhealthy. And I don't want them owning the doctor's piece of it. I think they need to keep that. I think we need to have separation of church and state here, where we have doctors providing medicine, healthcare, and administrators not telling them how to do it so they can be more profitable. I think there's going to be a painful market correction. And I think that the casualties will be, and I know they're well-meaning, and they don't know the harm that's being caused by these consolidations, but there are going to need to be fewer beds, inpatient beds, fewer big buildings, fewer hospital administrators who are going to need to find work doing what Mitchell does, helping with Medicare, right, or doing some other contractual work. They have great skills. We just don't need them inflating the costs in our health systems. So I do like the idea of hospitals helping one another out. I just don't like the idea of them becoming $40 billion health systems that dominate a country. So there's a happy medium. I'm not anti-merger. I'm anti-monopoly. I help. Welcome, Celia.
Hi, Marni. Over here. Me?
Where? Oh, Celia. Hi.
I see and have seen for a long time that there's, in a lot of areas in healthcare, there's a lack of education. There's a lack of public education, which is the consumer. And in many ways, they don't know that a doctor is independent versus owned. They don't know to ask that question. They don't know that it makes any kind of a difference to their pocket. They don't understand the ramifications. They don't understand that they have choices. I speak from a physician's office, that they don't realize, the consumer doesn't realize they have choice. They don't realize that when the doctor writes an order that sends them to Florida Hospital or Orlando Health for an X-ray or an MRI or a pricey diagnostic test, that they don't have to go there. They just, the average consumer are like sheep. They just go where they're told to go. What we don't seem to be getting much, the Orlando Sentinel does a good job on education in certain areas, but they seem to not want to step on the toes of their chief advertisers, and I understand that. What can we as this group, or what can we encourage, how can we encourage additional education of the person who's utilizing the services?
That's what I want to do. I want to make sure patients know. The question is, what can we do to educate consumers that going to an independent doctor is going to save them money in the long run when they go where they're told, and they don't always know what puppet strings are happening over the heads of their doctor. So I like that. I try to educate consumers. I think it's one of my roles, and we're getting somewhere. But I just got off the phone yesterday, and I've talked with this woman before who's the Vice President of Health Strategy for Delta. Delta has a great program. They had it in place, and I talked to them about 2014 when I first started, and I wanted to see how it was going. It's going very well. They have a program nationwide. All of their employees must go, unless they're flat on their bed in a hospital and are at the mercy of the hospital, God help them, they have to go to an independent MRI imaging center for any X-ray, any MRI, any CAT scan. And there's like and this is through United Healthcare, and United Healthcare was the one that brought this to their attention. So there's a help finder, and they show them the independent doctors and the hospital-owned facilities. If the patient who has the choice, who's not stuck in the hospital, chooses to go to a hospital-owned facility, they will be charged a fine of $250. Penalty. Not just will they get, that was dumb because now it costs us all more money. They get fined. And they're channeled to go, and they're trained to go to the freestanding medical centers or imaging centers. She said they're trying to expand that to other things like, I said, why don't you create a network of independent doctors and encourage them to see that in a vertical network of independent doctors? They're all over the country, so it's harder when they're that widespread. But she said, we're talking about it. We're figuring it out. But she said that originally, and I get it, originally the Delta employees, some are less enlightened than others, thought the Delta was trying to cheap out, give them the inferior care to save money for their benefit. She said it took a long time for them to realize this was a really smart thing to do. So there is some hope out there. She said they get it now. They love it. We get no complaints for this program. They appreciate that they now know how to divine the difference between paying too much, going this way, and the fine certainly helps. There's another bill called a Right to Shop bill. It's being circulated around. It's a state legislation. I have spoken in Tallahassee on behalf of the Right to Shop bill. It's put out by the Foundation for Government Accountability, which sounds like an oxymoron. And they have gotten somewhere in Florida where it's a Right to Shop bill where patients are encouraged to shop for the price of their care, and they give them the tools through their insurance company. And if they choose to get, I think they gave a case of interferon treatment, which one treatment could be like $30,000 in one clinic and $10,000 in another. It's a big difference. If they turn left out of the driveway instead of right, and they go to the less expensive place for interferon, the patient gets cash back. They get to share in the savings of whatever they saved the health insurance company and ultimately their own employer. Remarkably, it got sort of passed in Florida. Only state employees of Florida get to do that. But state employees of Florida have the Right to Shop bill at the ready. So they choose to shop for care and save money, they can get cash back. Because what the Government Accountability Office found out was patients don't always make the best choice. But even if they know that it's less expensive to go here than there, if their insurance is covering it, they're like, who cares? But if they're going to get a cash back incentive, that has caused them to make a difference. And I spoke at the Innovations Committee, Health Innovations Committee in Tallahassee about a year ago about this bill. And I think there were 11 people. We had all but 2 votes. Florida Blue and the hospital brought up truckloads of people. There were 3 of us speaking out on this bill, and there were 15 of them. And we got the vote 9-2. The Health Innovations Committee said, now that is an innovative idea. We like it. And it didn't get all the way through, and you know how it works in Florida. It starts over again. But anyway, we had our voices heard, and we think there's some receptiveness to that idea.
What about the any willing provider legislation that's floated around and disappeared, and hopefully, we can get some interest again in Florida? That's just Florida.
Yeah, any willing provider needs to happen. And the hospital, I don't understand, I do sort of understand why insurance companies are making it so difficult for us to get better our providers into networks that need to be covered by networks. Any willing provider is that if there's a provider who has meets all the qualifications, and there's a network that they can't get into, the network needs to let them into the fold. You're willing to do it, you can do it, do it. We allow you to do it. But we have very good providers who are not allowed to get contracts because the insurance companies are saying we're closed to you. So this is a little bit into the weeds, but you all can take this. One of the mandates in the Affordable Care Act was the medical loss ratio, which sounded like a fantastic idea. Medical loss ratio said that for every dollar an insurance company gets in premiums, 80 cents has to go to pay for claims, and 20 cents goes to the overhead of the insurance company. That sounds fair. So you don't have these, only 40 cents goes to claims and we get 60, fine. Well, that backfired because business is always 2 steps ahead of government, and the insurance companies quickly realized, 20% of 2,000 is better than 20% of 1,000. So we'll raise premiums so we can get more money. And when his costs go up, that makes it easier to achieve our 80%. It totally backfired. So that is another reason that insurance networks they're not that interested in keeping costs down. I'd like to say there's more interest in that, but there just isn't, because they're incented to raise premiums. And it's much more lucrative for them to have hospital-employed physicians who make and generate more money for them, and so then they can say, sorry, we have to raise premiums because the cost of care just keeps going up.
We have time for one more question.
Good morning, Marni. This has been fascinating. My name is Martin Forster. I'm with a company called Pharmanex. I'm also a member of Moroff, and as are several other members in the audience here, I'm a member of AID.
Oh, yay.
Attended the town hall meeting, found it fascinating.
Thank you.
First, an observation. I was fascinated. It's a statistic we all know. 440,000 people die from medical error every year. I just did a little math on that. A jumbo jet, 747, accommodates about 500 passengers. That's a crash rate of 2.41 per day.
Ooh.
That's horrifying. I think we all agree that an industry that does that is pretty profoundly broken in many different ways. And now a quick question. In listening to you, you have talked on a number of occasions about how the FTC has been your backstop, your ultimate, if you will, court of appeal, or at least a great ally. I think none of us in the room would disagree that we're in the midst of some tremendous legislature change that's going on in this country, both politically and a number of other ways. Do you foresee a time when the FTC is not as much of a friend and ally to you as it is perhaps today?
The question is there a time that I foresee that the FTC would not be as much of a friend to our cause as it is today? I am not that cynical yet. I have sat down with them. I have been on conference calls with them. I have looked them in the eye, and we have fought the good fight. I know that they don't like what's happening. I've also seen that they're spread extremely thin. They're bright lawyers, but they're not completely informed, and it's hard to be on all the dynamics happening in healthcare. It is an unusual market. So they're dealing with Big O tires merging on one day, and then they have Florida Hospital buying. They have to do all consolidation in all industries and do a deep dive and figure it out and make their arguments on a government salary. So I think they do genuinely and they've said, we really, really appreciate hearing from you because you can boil down and speak for America's doctors, independent doctors. So I think that we are channeling something important, and I'm efficient for them because in one person they get to hear from 1,000 members. And so I do think we have a voice. Tom Thomas and Carol Zurcher went up before I went up, and they had 6 attorneys sitting down at a table, and Tommy held court, as only Tommy can, and told them all that just laid it out for them. Stack after stack after stack of documentation, and they were riveted. They stayed till 7 o'clock at night after hours listening to his presentation. I think they're sympathetic. I think they want to know. I think they want to fix it. They are limited, and they have educated me. This was, one of them said to me, Marni, and this is when I have to tell you, monopolies aren't illegal. I was humbled. He said, we can't fight for a law that doesn't exist. So it's not illegal if I'm hospital A and I want to buy hospital B and it's going to expand my footprint, that's not illegal. What is illegal is if these two have a geographic market that they share and you can prove that costs will go up as a result of them buying up their competition, then that's antitrust. And then they can go in and fight. But a hospital merely buying a hospital across the state that doesn't share a geographic market, they're powerless. So they need to show, we need proof that these two entities compete and that what they are doing is buying up the competition. That's antitrust. But you can hopscotch around the country and buy a hospital every 100 miles from here to Kingdom Come, and that's a monopoly, but it's not illegal. So I think they're doing the best they can.
Marni, what a great presentation. Give it up for her, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your attention.